At dawn, the ship should not have been there at all. Its hull was scarred, its engines unreliable, and its orders quietly written off as a formality. In the gray swell of a hostile sea, naval planners had already accepted the outcome. This vessel, outgunned, underprepared, and widely considered expendable, was sent forward not to win, but to delay, to absorb damage, to die buying time. Enemy lookouts spotted it early, against a modern, coordinated force. This lone ship appeared almost tragic, an echo of older doctrine drifting into a mechanized war that no longer made room for heroics. What followed was not part of any war plan. By the time the smoke cleared, 6 enemy vessels would be burning, crippled, or sunk. And the ship that was never supposed to survive would leave behind one of the most improbable combat records of the Second World War. By the midpoint of World War II, naval warfare had become brutally mathematical. Fleet strength was calculated in tonnage. Survival depended on radar coverage, air superiority, and overwhelming firepower. Ships that fell outside those equations, older hulls, damaged escorts, hastily repaired vessels, were liabilities. Yet the war had a way of creating impossible gaps. Across multiple theaters, Allied commanders faced chronic shortages of frontline ships. Industrial output, while massive, could not instantly replace losses from submarines, air attack, and surface engagements. In critical moments, task forces were forced to deploy whatever hulls were afloat, regardless of condition. Enemy doctrine exploited this ruthlessly. German and Japanese naval forces both understood that weak escorts and damaged ships were prime targets. U-boats hunted stragglers. Surface raiders sought isolated vessels to eliminate piecemeal. In contested waters, a single compromised ship could doom an entire convoy or invite an annihilating ambush. Statistics tell the scale of the crisis. In the Atlantic alone, Allied shipping losses peaked in 1942, with more than 1,600 merchant ships destroyed in a single year. In the Pacific, smaller Allied surface groups routinely faced larger, better armed enemy formations during rapid Japanese expansion. Doctrine offered little comfort. Standard naval thinking emphasized withdrawal, concealment, or sacrifice when confronted with superior force. A damaged or outdated ship was expected to scream, distract, and, if necessary, be lost. But war does not always obey doctrine. Sometimes survival depends not on strength, but on audacity. On commanders willing to exploit enemy assumptions. On crews who refuse to play the role assigned to them. And occasionally, the very ship marked for destruction becomes the most dangerous vessel on the battlefield. The ship at the center of this story had no reason to succeed. Its flaws were known, its mission was modest, its survival was never expected, but its captain understood something the enemy did not. That predictability was a weakness, and desperation, when weaponized, could become an advantage. What they sent as a disposable asset would soon behave like a trap, and the enemy would sail straight into it. The idea did not come from Washington. It did not come from a naval laboratory, a war college, or a procurement board. It came from a captain staring at the limits of his ship and refusing to accept them. By early 1945, USS Barb, a Gato-class submarine, was nearing the end of a punishing combat career in the Pacific. She had been damaged repeatedly. Her deck gun had been removed earlier in the war. Mechanical issues plagued her engines. Compared to newer submarines entering service, Barb was already considered outdated. More importantly, Japanese defenses had evolved. Coastal shipping had adapted to submarine threats by hugging shorelines, sailing in shallow water where torpedoes were unreliable and submarines risked grounding. Anti-submarine nets, minefields, and patrol craft made conventional attacks increasingly dangerous. For a submarine like Barb, whose torpedoes were precious, and whose ability to dive was not what it once had been, the problem was existential. Captain Eugene Lucky Flucky understood this reality intimately. By 1945, he had already conducted multiple aggressive patrols, often pushing Barb far closer to shore than doctrine recommended. He believed Japanese coastal traffic was vulnerable, but only if attacked in ways the enemy did not expect. The spark of innovation came from frustration. Flucky knew that Barb still had one advantage: surface, speed, and surprise at night. What she lacked was a weapon that could strike shallow, defended targets quickly, without exposing the submarine long enough for counterattack. The solution was radical. Instead of relying solely on torpedoes, Flucky proposed mounting 5-inch spin, stabilized rockets, originally designed for aircraft, directly onto Barb's deck. Fired from simple launch rails, these rockets could strike targets ashore or in harbors without requiring the submarine to close dangerously or expend torpedoes. It was, by the standards of the U.S. Navy, almost reckless. Submarines were not rocket platforms. Rockets were inaccurate. Firing them required surfacing in enemy waters. A misfire could be catastrophic. But Flucky saw something others missed. Japanese coastal vessels were lightly armored. Fuel depots, docks, warehouses, and small escorts were packed tightly near shore. Even inaccurate rockets, fired in volume, could devastate targets never designed to absorb such attacks. Most importantly, the enemy would not expect it. Permission was granted, not because the Navy fully believed in the concept, but because Barb was already operating on the margins of acceptable risk. If the experiment failed, the loss would be regrettable but not decisive. The rockets were mounted. The crew trained quickly. There was no formal manual, no doctrine, no precedent. Only a simple understanding: speed, darkness, and shock would determine survival. Skepticism followed the idea everywhere. Other submarine commanders dismissed the rockets as gimmicks. Torpedoes, they argued, were proven weapons. Rockets were for aircraft, unreliable, inaccurate, and ill-suited to precision naval combat. Even within Barb's crew, there were doubts. The launch rails were improvised. The firing angles were limited. Once surfaced, Barb would be vulnerable to shore batteries, patrol craft, and aircraft. If the rockets failed to fire, or revealed their position without causing damage, the submarine could be trapped in shallow water with no room to maneuver. The first test came cautiously. Barb surfaced at night near the Japanese coast, engines idling, crew tense. The order was given. Rockets ignited with a violent hiss, streaking toward shore in brilliant arcs. Explosions followed. Fuel storage ignited. Structures collapsed. Fires spread rapidly across the target area. Japanese defenders, caught entirely off guard, responded slowly and inaccurately. By the time return fire began, Barb was already submerging. The results were undeniable. The rockets worked, not because they were precise, but because they created chaos. They overwhelmed defenses psychologically as much as physically. Japanese gunners had never trained for a submarine attacking from the surface with rockets. Subsequent attacks refined the method. Barb struck harbors, coastal shipping concentrations, and infrastructure targets. Rockets were fired in salvos, saturating small areas rather than aiming at individual vessels. The goal was not elegance. It was destruction and confusion. Yet skepticism persisted at higher levels. Reports from Barb were met with cautious approval, but widespread adoption never followed. The war was nearing its end. Resources were focused elsewhere. Many officers still viewed Flucky's tactics as exceptions, made possible only by extraordinary audacity. What they could not deny were the results. Ships burned at their moorings. Patrol craft were destroyed before they could react. Enemy defenses were disrupted with minimal risk to the submarine. Barb was no longer a liability. She had become something else entirely. A platform for asymmetrical naval warfare. Although the rocket innovation itself was not widely replicated before the war ended, the operational philosophy behind it spread rapidly through Barb's actions. Flucky's broader approach rejected passive survival in favor of aggressive unpredictability. Barb began operating closer to the Japanese home islands than nearly any other American submarine. She entered harbors. She attacked anchored ships. She struck rail infrastructure using shore parties, another action previously considered unthinkable for a submarine crew. Each mission followed the same principles: exploit enemy assumptions, attack where defenses were weakest. disappear before the enemy could adapt. During her final patrols, Barb engaged multiple enemy vessels in rapid succession. Japanese escorts, coastal freighters, and patrol boats, often lightly armed and poorly coordinated, were destroyed not through superior firepower, but through surprise and initiative. One after another, enemy vessels were caught stationary, clustered, or unprepared. Rockets shattered decks. Conventional torpedoes finished crippled targets. In several engagements, Japanese ships never transmitted warnings before being struck. In total, 6 enemy vessels were destroyed or fatally damaged during this period, not by a modern capital ship or carrier group, but by a submarine that many had quietly written off as past its prime. The psychological effect was disproportionate to the tonnage destroyed. Japanese coastal commanders now faced an impossible problem: how to defend against an enemy that could attack from underwater, from the surface, and even from the shore itself. Resources were diverted, patrols increased, shipping schedules were disrupted. Barb's actions forced the enemy to defend everywhere, stretching already exhausted defenses thinner with every night attack. When the war ended, Barb returned home not as a relic, but as one of the most decorated submarines of the Pacific War. What had begun as an experiment on a broken ship had rewritten assumptions about what naval power could look like when innovation was driven from the deck upward, not imposed from the top down. The most dangerous part of USS Barb's final patrols was not the technology, it was proximity. In January 1945, Barb slipped into waters that most American submarines avoided entirely: the narrow, shallow approaches along the Japanese home islands. Here, depth charges were less necessary. Shore batteries, patrol boats, mines, and aircraft formed a layered defense meant to deny submarines any room to survive. Barb entered anyway. On the night of January 24, 1945, Barb surfaced off the coast of Karafuto, southern Sakhalin. Intelligence indicated heavy rail traffic supplying Japanese forces. No submarine had ever attacked land infrastructure directly on the Japanese home front. Flucky authorized something unprecedented: a shore party. 8 sailors led by Lieutenant Earl T. Roper went ashore under cover of darkness carrying explosives. The surf was freezing. Enemy patrols were nearby. Detection meant capture or execution. The team reached the railway line and placed a delayed action demolition charge. Hours later, as Barb withdrew, a Japanese train carrying military supplies detonated, derailing cars and killing personnel aboard. It was the only known ground combat operation conducted on the Japanese home islands by U.S. forces during World War II. But the sea would prove even deadlier. In the weeks that followed, Barb conducted repeated surface attacks using her rocket launchers. Japanese coastal shipping, often small escorts, trawlers, and supply vessels, was caught at anchor or moving slowly near shore. One engagement unfolded in near silence. Barb detected a cluster of enemy vessels moored inside a small harbor. Rather than attempt risky torpedo shots in shallow water, Flucky ordered a surface approach. At close range, rockets were launched in rapid succession. Explosions tore through the harbor. Fuel ignited. Deck guns on the Japanese ships fired wildly into darkness, unable to identify the attacker. Barb submerged before effective resistance could form. Several vessels burned through the night. In another encounter, Barb intercepted a coastal convoy, escorted by lightly armed patrol craft. Instead of attacking from below, Flucky surfaced at night, closing rapidly. Rockets disabled the escorts first, crippling their ability to respond. Torpedoes finished the larger cargo ships moments later. Japanese after-action reports would later describe these attacks as confusing, disorienting, and terrifying. Crews reported explosions from nowhere, followed by fire and chaos before any coordinated defense could be mounted. By the end of the patrol, 6 enemy vessels had been sunk or destroyed, many without warning, some without even identifying their attacker. What made these engagements remarkable was not just the outcome, but the speed. Traditional submarine warfare relied on patience, hours of tracking, careful firing solutions, cautious withdrawal. Barb's attacks unfolded in minutes. Shock replaced stealth. Surprise replaced concealment. In a war increasingly dominated by overwhelming industrial power, Barb proved that initiative still mattered. Measured purely in tonnage, Barb's achievements might seem modest, but warfare is not decided by tonnage alone. Barb's late war operations forced the Imperial Japanese Navy and coastal defense forces to confront a new threat they were unequipped to counter. Submarines were no longer confined to underwater ambush. They could strike harbors, shore infrastructure, and anchored shipping, then vanish. Japanese responses were reactive and inefficient. Coastal patrols increased, stretching already depleted manpower. Harbor defenses were reinforced, diverting resources from convoy escort and anti-aircraft duties. Shipping schedules were altered, slowing logistics during a period when Japan's supply lines were already collapsing under air and submarine attack. Perhaps most importantly, Barb's actions reinforced a broader Allied realization asymmetrical tactics could multiply effectiveness even late in the war. By 1945, Japan faced catastrophic shortages of fuel, trained crews, and repair capacity. Each lost vessel, even a small one, had cascading effects. A single destroyed trawler might mean a convoy without escort. A disabled harbor could delay shipments for weeks. Enemy commanders never fully adapted. The war ended before systematic countermeasures could be developed. Rocket-armed submarines remained an anomaly, not because they were ineffective, but because the window for their widespread use closed with Japan's surrender in August 1945. Yet the lesson was clear. Innovation did not always come from laboratories or admirals' offices. Sometimes, it came from a captain willing to challenge the assumptions of his own navy. After the war, USS Barb quietly took her place among history's most effective submarines. She was credited with sinking 17 enemy ships, totaling more than 96,000 tons, and earned 6 Presidential Unit citations, the only submarine to receive that many. Her captain, Eugene Fluckey, received the Medal of Honor. Yet the rocket innovation itself faded from memory. Post-war naval doctrine favored missiles launched from specialized platforms. Submarines evolved toward nuclear propulsion, ballistic deterrence, and long-range strike, not coastal harassment. But the principle behind Barb's success endured. Modern naval strategy increasingly emphasizes flexibility, unpredictability, and multi-domain operations. Littoral combat ships, special operations forces, and unmanned platforms all echo Barb's core lesson: exploit what the enemy does not expect. Barb was never meant to change the war. She was meant to survive long enough to matter. Instead, she demonstrated that even a ship considered obsolete, damaged, limited, and underestimated could still shape the battlefield through ingenuity and courage. This story did not begin with a master plan. It began with a problem no one wanted to solve: a damaged submarine, shallow waters, an enemy adapting faster than doctrine allowed. The safe choice would have been caution. Conservative patrols, minimal engagement, survival over risk. Instead, USS Barb chose audacity. Her captain looked at what the ship lacked and asked a different question. What could it still do that the enemy wasn't prepared for? Rockets turned weakness into surprise. Surface attacks replaced passive waiting. Even the shore itself became a battlefield. 6 enemy vessels destroyed, infrastructure disrupted, defenses confused, and a psychological impact far greater than the physical damage inflicted. But beneath the statistics lies the human truth. Sailors volunteered to go ashore in enemy territory. Crews trusted experimental weapons with their lives. A captain accepted responsibility for choices no manual endorsed. This was not reckless heroism. It was disciplined imagination. Innovation driven by necessity, executed with precision, and grounded in an understanding of the enemy's assumptions. In a war defined by mass production and overwhelming force, Barb reminds us that decisions made by individuals still mattered. Sometimes, the ship sent to die is the one that teaches the enemy how wars are really fought. If you enjoy deep, researched World War II stories that go beyond familiar battles and explore the human decisions behind history's turning points. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. These stories don't come from myths, they come from patrol logs, after-action reports, memoirs, and the quiet courage of people whose names rarely make headlines. Let us know in the comments which lesser-known World War II story should we uncover next. A forgotten submarine patrol, an overlooked commander, an innovation that almost didn't happen. Upcoming episodes will explore more untold moments where a single decision reshaped the battlefield. Thank you for watching and for remembering.